Welcome, everybody. We're going to start on time with, and thank you all for coming on time and early. And look at our panel. Is this the most organized panel you've ever seen? It's fantastic.
Quite in the order of that, but still, we want to keep everyone.
Okay, make sure everybody's mics are on.
Test one.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so we're just going to start with a little idle chatter, and then we'll poll the audience as seats fill in. We'll show some slides. We'll do Q&A. About halfway through, if you guys want to watch your watches, you can start asking questions to keep things going. But, you know, every time we do this panel, every 6 months, the entire industry continues to just build on top of itself exponentially, and it's literally unbelievable. Just, you know, randomly, we'll do intros in a few minutes. What's the biggest shocker that you guys are seeing across the board in general, just in your work environment? What's the most amazing thing in terms of, you know, what clients are asking for, what you guys are delivering? You know, what is the most unbelievable component of what you're seeing right now?
That's a big question. I'll go first. I'm always amazed that people still have landlines. And this is something that people like holding on to that. And people talk about cord cutting and stuff, but a lot of people are still holding on to, you know, even though we're streaming all the time, we're still having this other tax that we pay, which I always find interesting.
I would say it's probably not just the volume of content, but all of the platforms and businesses that are getting involved in the original content space. It's just proliferating, and everyone wants a piece of it. So it's even hard to keep up when that's your job.
I was going to say, it's crazy to see all the layoffs at a lot of these media publishing companies and traditional magazines, and how a lot of those dollars are now shifting to digital, and how quickly it's happening. And it's an exciting time to be in our space.
Tim, what do you see?
Tim, what you
Well, I'm the software guy, so it's not as sexy as these brand campaigns. But yeah, I think it's just the amount of content, the amount of time that you think at some point that time spent on these social platforms, the amount of content that's spent on these social platforms will at some point plateau. But just this year, I think it's something like 4 or 5x the amount of video has already been published to social platforms year over year compared to 2017. So it's not slowing down.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that for me,
Closer.
I'm just always surprised that we haven't evolved past a CPM as the measurement for influencer, when it's so much more than that. And I think the other big surprise, or at least clients are very surprised at how organic reach across the platforms for influencers specifically is so much lower. And I'm always shocked that clients don't validate their partners. And so I think that's quite shocking, that they just take whatever a partner says verbatim instead of doing an audit and finding out that they're not actually delivering that organic reach that they say they are.
So, you know, stock market talks about bubbles bursting and crashing. You know, in our world, is there a bubble that's going to burst? I mean, we'll show a slide in a few moments talking about Netflix promising 700 new shows over the next year, but the amount of content that's being pushed to market, whether it's a brand or an entertainment property, and the amount of materials that are being created and pushed out there, and obviously the overload that consumers may or may not be experiencing. Is there a bubble that, you know, is on the horizon, or is it just going to keep growing? What are you seeing?
I mean, I would probably separate long-form content and what I would call media companies. So I can speak less to Netflix versus Amazon versus ABC on the kind of professional content. Again, I mean, just back to my original point, the amount of time spent, and that's really what the social platforms care about at this point, is not daily active users, monthly active users. They really care about time spent on these platforms because they're going after TV dollars. But when the average consumer spends somewhere between 2 and 6 hours a day in a feed-based world, I don't really see a bubble there. I think it's hard to think that Facebook or Instagram or YouTube are in a quote-unquote bubble. But I do think there's just a lot more competition. And as you said, getting that attention organically is going to be more and more difficult. So there's just a new strategy that brands are going to have to roll out. If you're talking about the branded content world, to compete for eyeballs.
I think we'll just also have to continue to reevaluate our success metrics. I think, TV, it would be, insane to expect a 7.0 rating nowadays. So similarly, I think with content, because there's so much more content, the expectation of success for a piece of content is going to shift.
Just to build on that, I don't think there's a bubble. I think there's going to be lots and lots more content. But to your point, it's not as easy as just creating a random piece of content and hoping that someone's going to see it. And so we're actually going back to the fundamentals of advertising, of actually creating really amazing content that people want to see, and brands have to work a lot harder than they did before. So a lot of direct-to-consumer brands launched and they just put content out there and just expected their product to sell right away. And because there's more content out there, people want to consume great content. And so the burden is once back on creativity and really choosing the right creative partner.
From an advertising brand point of view, I would say that there is going to be an apocalypse soon. We're starting to see this already. Like even today, Sierra's going to be around in a year. Like, do we care? The proliferation of instant access to what we want, not only goods and services, but digital content, is going to have long-term effect on a lot of brands. And we say there's a meaningfulness to brands, and most brands do not have that meaningfulness. And so there's a very small subset of brands that can produce that. Those are the brands that are going to win, and the other ones are going to go bye.
Agree with that.
Tanya, what do you think?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I think there's a TV bubble that's going to come. I mean, how can ratings be down 30 and 40% year over year for award shows and they still fetch record highs? Like, that's not going to sustain. I think there's a real tension in the marketplace right now between clinging on to what's always worked. Like, when you look out at the world, I think of the world in like two general phases. One phase where I'm at the top of my game and I want to get a promotion, I want to make a difference, I want to innovate, like I want to go out and crush it. And another mode where like I want to keep my damn job, I want to cover my ass, I want to just not be noticed, I'm going to work from home so someone forgets that I still work here so I can't get fired. That's a real story, by the way. And I think we're sort of in that world right now, so I think that to the earlier question of what's surprising, like, when you think about, this platform's about social. So if you think about the concept of social, there's like two tensions. One is messaging and private world communications, and another is broadcasting and public world communications. I'm really surprised that a format like IG Stories, which was sort of meant to be a little more like messaging, I think has become a much more high reach, closer to broadcasting type thing. We just started measuring Instagram stories a couple of months ago, and I've been pretty blown away by how much people want to proactively go and seek out content in that format. And I think that's just where a lot of the growth is going to keep coming from.
Well, I also think that speaks to what the platforms want consumers to see. So
Sure.
that content's top of feed. When someone goes live, you get a push notification. There's social commerce involved in that content type. So again, it keeps people on the platform and engaged over scrolling through a feed.
Yeah,
I think it's also showing a tendency of the shortness of that.
Yeah.
So the brevity of attention span that we now have as consumers is replicated by the fact that we have to get all these stories in really quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the metrics too, and we're like, there's 2 tap forwards. Is that good? Is that bad? Like, tap forward, tap back. What does that mean? We're sitting there trying to figure out what all the good KPIs are. But at least if someone's tapping, there's a sign of life, right? I think that, to contrast to the impression, which is like an opportunity for this to be exposed to someone who may or may not be alive, which is a pretty scary threshold.
So as everything is changing all at the same time, everything from production and genre and targeting and syndication and streaming versus broadcast and cable and shows moving to different networks over their lifetime, as every department at every network and studio continues to shift, which is one of the challenges that we see. One of the opportunities is to start to establish best practices as everything is trying to change. So there's a real give and take. What are you guys starting to see and feel in terms of, on the entertainment side, in terms of sort of strategic best practices as it applies to, let's just look at television for a moment. What are your clients wanting and needing, and how are you delivering sort of strategies for them?
I'll weigh in, at least in terms of what we see the tension as. And, we're not in the business of delivering strategies, but I think there's a real tension between the parts of a TV network that want to look at social media to essentially work like a vending machine for more ratings and more viewers. So it's the pushing tune-in messages, reminders to watch, click to watch this in the online thing. It's essentially like trying to create a marketing campaign that gets all of you all in this room together, and then the second you're here says, actually, we want to go to another floor together, come with me to another floor. It's like really, really hard to get people to do two things. And then there's the other side of the business on the sales side, which seems to be embracing monetizing on-platform activity. So that's all of the rise in like branded videos and custom content and native social and all of that. And I think the two are sort of really battling at the moment, because it's very hard to treat one as sort of a ratings and a click machine, and then another part to actually monetize the fact that people are there. So thinking about how to serve both masters in that way is a big tension that we see. And then, of course, you think, add in talent, add in influencers, like all of that as well.
Yeah, we have a client who works in television at one of the studios, and says if everyone on the sales side, if every show gets 1 million viewers, what's really the difference between those shows, right? From a sales perspective, to your point, everyone's competing with how do we package this social audience, how do we have extensions in the digital, how do we follow these viewers across our owned and operated channels. How do we measure their conversation around our shows? And really, that's how they're trying to differentiate themselves from the competition and say, look, we've got an audience that's more engaged. Even if we're all getting a million viewers on broadcast, we've got a more engaged audience offline or online. Therefore, you should be partnering with us.
Yeah. I work with a lot of TV networks, especially in creating digital content and strategies. And I'd say, to your point, I think it has shifted a lot, maybe even just over the last, 2 years, from wanting to drive people to linear to understanding the value of creating an audience on the social channels and creating a more immersive and continued story experience for them. So the custom content that kind of feeds that fan base and keeps them engaged when they're not watching the show. And that helps them to evangelize so that they become their own network of advocates for driving to linear. So I have seen more and more that our counterparts on the network side are not pushing us to drive to linear almost at all. It's really more about how can we keep people engaged so that they want to share more about this story.
And I would just say, when most of us, when we're on TV, we're also looking at our phone. No one's fully engaged in whatever that TV show is. So you have to continue that conversation online. And I think for us, I represent influencers, and on the talent side, I got to say the broadcast networks are a little slow because they're not utilizing our influencers who have a huge platform to drive that engagement online. And I think that, the brands have really come a long way. I mean, I think the beauty industry in particular was the first to really latch on to these influencers and drive that conversation online. And you can see all of these trends in beauty that are, launched by these influencers in the online platform. So I think the broadcast networks are really, really slow to utilize the influencers in a real strategic way.
I think I was just going to say the industry that's done really well that I think could be an interesting model is the gaming industry. So if you think of like Riot Games and you think about all of the EA Sports and how they've built audiences to cross the different properties that they're trying to create these audiences for, and their use of influencers and their use of social media is far different than the way studios or entertainment clients tend to go. I mean, I feel like every time we have a studio client or we have a network client, they are expect to build an audience from scratch every single time. We feel like we start from scratch every single time, where the gaming companies don't think about it that way. They're using lots of data analytics technology to create data lakes where they actually know everything about their consumers across their different titles, and then they're able to tap into those insights for those different titles. And I think that siloed approach those walls have to come down in entertainment, so that we, at least from our perspective when we deal with entertainment companies, it just feels like we start from scratch every time.
So, back to the idea of bringing in outside influencers onto entertainment properties. Obviously, the networks wrestle with their own talent that they actually own, like, Roseanne, sticking her foot, in her mouth, or even Damon Wayans on Lethal Weapon, who announced, online that he's leaving the show. So trusting an outside influencer, certainly the networks have tried to do that, and they, go back and forth, and sometimes they find things. But what are you guys finding more in terms on the, with the influencer side and verifying and bonifying and really trusting that this influencer is going to behave themselves and work professionally, yet being authentic? I mean, I see a major, the struggle continues.
Yeah, I mean, talent's always been talent. This isn't a new thing. Talent are very creative, and oftentimes for decades can be difficult to work with. And then there's also angels of talent to work with. But I mean, this is your world.
Well,
you can speak to it.
I was just going to say, I think 4 years ago, it was a very different time, and you would reach out to an influencer on their email, and they'd say, yes, I'm down to do something. Then you would never hear from them again. You're like, oh my gosh, I just put my whole budget into your creative. But now there's talent agents like me, and we have really established relationships in the space, and I think that it's, yes, you guys have ample evidence of who they are online, because they are who they are. They're not playing a character. This is their real life, and you can do your research, and I think that's really important, that brands get to know the talent that they want to work with, and networks and studios too. And then from there, you have established relationships in the industry, and you build from there. But I don't think, from 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when influencers went rogue, and there was a lot more kind of chaos, I think it's definitely settled down. And you can just tell kind of online, they're based off their personality, like who is a professional human and who is not.
I think, though, we hear about all of the crazy things because they're fun and salacious, but in the grand scheme of things, if you think about how much content is produced by influencers out there and how little you hear about the scandals, it's really, really, really minor. You just hear a lot about it. And just to add on to what you said, I think it is professionalized. It is definitely, we're dealing with more managers of influencers, but even the influencers direct, they understand the risks of being inauthentic. But for brands and for studios, the days of just randomly searching Instagram and picking an influencer to produce a few pieces of content and then, paying the money and that's the end of the day, it's gone. That was the simple, low-hanging fruit way of doing it. You have to have much longer term, deeper relationships if you want to get the value out of an influencer. It's a relationship at the end of the day. And if you're not willing to put in the work, either by hiring an agency like ours, or you have a team dedicated on your team to manage the talent and the relationship, then just throwing good money after bad, I just don't think it's going to be fruitful.
So, just want to interject. Like an actor, actors don't represent themselves. A bona fide real actor has a rep. And would we say that influencers now, to demonstrate your authenticity or your legitimacy, that you do have a rep, you have an agent or a manager, someone?
I don't know if it demonstrates now they're legit. I think that, what my talent agency is, it's based off commission. So if you're making money, then we're making money. So that's how you verify whether they're successful. You know, do you have a brand safe audience? Are you able to translate that into other areas of the entertainment industry? If so, I want to represent you. But unlike traditional talent, you know, in this world, because it started so recently, there were so many brands that were reaching out directly to talent. And in the traditional world, that wasn't the case. You always had casting agents, or you always had producers. It was kept very private, so it wasn't easily attainable for every actor to get a starring role. It's just not easy. However, 2 years ago, there's still talent that are amazing talent that don't have representatives, that you just email them directly and they get the job for themselves. So I think for the most part, it really has pushed us to be extremely resourceful in finding opportunities, proving our value, figuring out other ancillary businesses off of the platforms to really generate revenue for them, because we don't take it for granted that any brand can reach out directly to them and make a deal happen.
I want to jump in a little bit and talk about influencers from the standpoint of advertisers and brands. There's what I would call the premium influencers, which are the folks that have representation in more traditional context. And there's also the next generation of influencers, which are not yet mature enough necessarily to have that formal representation. And we're seeing the schism where you have sort of a more traditional approach where you'll hire an influencer or a series of influencers to be a spokesperson of the brand, or even an ambassador for it, in a more traditional distribution mechanism where they'll post a social bit of content that is typically sent out to their fans. We're starting to see real interest of brands embracing the next generation of consumers where they're actually making the content themselves. And we've had some great successes where we've embedded teams of influencers inside brand studios, inside their own corporate halls, to create content on behalf of the brand. And that's another recent trend that we're seeing grow.
Yeah, I was just going to say, unlike traditional talent as well, which you can keep up with them, I guess, on TMZ or Us Weekly, every creator literally has their entire life and history online. Yep. And you have more tools, more intelligence out there to know if they're brand safe, if they're the level of profanity they use, who their audience is, everything. You have to do the work to make sure that you work with the right partner, whether it's direct or through talent representation. But it's literally online. Like,
I would also say there's technology that enables you to do this at scale too.
Yeah, so exactly. Oh, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Little setup.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting at that without being so direct about.
I did it for you.
Okay, so now that we're settling in, I want to just do a quick run down the line. If you could each introduce yourself and also describe, really quickly what you do during your workday.
Tim, workday. All right, so Tim Sauvé, CEO of Creator IQ. We are a SaaS-based platform that helps companies like folks up here, but major brands and agencies scale and validate influencer marketing. So think of us as Salesforce for influencer marketing for shorthand. I also am a retired studio marketer, so I spent 10 years at Disney and Summit Entertainment in theatrical marketing. Yeah, still scarred, but about 10 years out, so that's why I keep deferring anything about current studio marketing to other folks. Day to day, so I help run and scale a startup. We're about 4 years old, 60 people, and are growing like crazy. But I'm the operations and business guy at the company.
My name is Jade Sherman. I'm the Vice President of the Alternative Programming, Digital Media, Branding, and Licensing Department at Abrams Artist Agency. More specifically, just to cut to the chase, I represent a lot of influencers, mostly influencers that are creating content on YouTube and Instagram. Those are the primary platforms. They vary from beauty, lifestyle, sports, comedy, baking, word making, just a lot of random verticals. But for us, the main focus is brand-friendly content and people that can sustain a real business off of the platforms as well. My day-to-day is, I'd say, 70% phone calls and emails, 30% therapy sessions for my clients, and 20% the rest of my life. So.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Gutierrez. I oversee digital and social marketing for Art Machine, which is a trailer park company. We work pretty specifically with only entertainment clients, so we work with a lot of TV networks and film studios to create social strategy and social content for their films and TV series. So I oversee a team of social managers and creatives that are, copywriting and creating strategies and building beautiful creative that goes out on those social platforms for those properties. So my day-to-day is mostly dealing with clients, trying to come up with innovative solutions for their properties that are, as I hate to say, they hack the platform or some other sort of advertising jargon that makes a campaign a little more exciting.
I'm Jason Drasinovic. I head up innovation for Havas globally. We're a traditional advertising and media conglomerate, and recently have become part of Vendi, which is a holding company that is also enormous. My day-to-day is really around bringing the future to brands now, and usually that means platforms, building systems, intelligence, customer intelligence, segmentation, often involved with new trends such as AI and AR and VR. I get all the acronyms basically. And then we have to sort of action on that into how they can build plans for that for the future. So often that's taking a traditional brand and thinking about what is the plan and how do they become relevant tomorrow.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Yuki. I'm the founder and CEO of Shareably. We sort of measure and provide analytics for all of the active social platforms. So predominantly driven nowadays by Instagram, but also with visibility across Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google+, which finally got shut down. Oh my God, we've been tracking that for 4 years, and I've been trying to shut it down. I was like, no, we put all this money into our Google+ page. It's true, right? Like one person blogged about how it was going to help you with search, and then everyone went off and did it. So we track pretty much every brand and now most every creator in the world with a view to providing consistent ways of measuring, performance, engagement levels, and now ad effectiveness downstream. And I mostly straddle sort of product development and our analytics function.
I'm Amy Luca. I'm the president of the Amplify, and we are an influencer marketing technology platform, but we focus on kind of the full service from strategy all the way through to influencer identification, vetting, and the creative process. So we really focus on the content delivery aspect and then the paid boosting and promotion of that content across platforms. We're part of the Mr. Jones group, which is, we say, the world's first brand tech group, which is a grouping of 20 companies and investments. We're investors in Pinterest, we're investors in Niantic, game company, and so we do a whole bunch of stuff other than just influencer and content. And I spend my days right now on an airplane because we've been expanding globally over the last 12 months. So we're now in Europe, South America, all through North America, Canada, obviously United States, and Asia. So we're rapidly expanding. So it's airplanes and interviews. That's my job, interviewing candidates.
And I'm Mark Karzan from Relish Mix. We track social media, reach, activity, cast activation, and conversation across Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. We track all broadcast, cable, and streaming television shows. We track all wide release theatrical titles as well as Oscar contenders and certain limited releases. And we use that data to report back to the studios. So we're totally independent, and we work for all studios in town, most of the broadcast networks. And we most critically deliver tactical insights. So we tell them how well they're tracking and where they can make adjustments. So I'm going to show a few slides just to sort of make some grand claims that we've been touching on for the last few minutes about the entertainment industry and where things are moving. This is, in YouTube land for 10 years, this has always been the most critical metric. How many subscribers do you have? But now with streaming OTT platforms, and this is, obviously programs as well as music mixed in with this. And at the bottom you can see MoviePass, which is certainly on its last legs. But, HBO, which has been around for, 40 years, 30 years, 35 years, obviously has a monstrous global connection, and you can see Netflix 125 million quickly, and Amazon. So this is obviously a key metric for all streaming platforms. And then Hulu down there at 17 million. This is the annual chart that John Landgraf publishes, and so this is at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. You can see in purple how there is a trend towards streaming programs in purple. And so back in 2011, there were 6, and now there's 117. And in that red box, this is the sort of prediction for the end of this year, which will be 520 scripted programs. But then cut to the next slide. Netflix is eyeing a total of 700 original series. So, like, nobody quite knows what this really means. It's like 700 episodes is what it feels like it should be, but how can you possibly produce 700 original series when the entire industry currently is at 487? Like, I don't really know.
And also it's October, they've got to hurry, right?
So this is crazy, and this is where we're going. This is a slide that shows the intersection of digital surpassing traditional television ad spending. Right around 2016, and that intersection kind of slides in different directions, but obviously with Google, YouTube, Facebook, targeting, buys, media, certainly in the entertainment part of the business has shifted radically to digital and social. This is just a simple graph from Relish Mix, and the type is a little small, but this is a trend that we see continuously. The smaller the social media universe for a given movie, the smaller the box office. In the most simplistic terms, the smaller the connected audience, the smaller the box office. And as the connected audience starts to grow, that's 38 million. As the connected audience continues to grow, so does box office. And this is Black Panther, which exceeded expectations by 200%. So totally off the chart at $235 million, and a connected audience of about 600 million. So is there a correlation between box office and social media? The answer is yes.
I just wanted to make a point about Black Panther, if that's okay.
Please.
Well, I did a lot of research into that because we were working on a property that's sort of that's a comp for us. And something that I found really interesting was that a lot of the campaign around Black Panther was actually grassroots. So quite a bit of it did not come from the studio, and then the studio caught on to what the grassroots movement was doing with the film and decided to participate in it. So I think with that example, it's an interesting sort of outlier because the story spoke to people in such a moving way that they felt the need to participate in it, whereas it wasn't necessarily marketing dollars that were driving all of that conversation.
And you note the line here, Black Panther went viral. In other words, I just saw an incredible movie, and I'm posting on my Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter that this is the greatest movie I've seen all year, and that's the effect that happens now in the movie business that never took place 10 years ago.
I mean, even before that, there was a campaign to get kids at the YMCA tickets to go, and that was not initiated by the studio. That was an entire, I think it was on Indiegogo.
I think it speaks to the new relevance of content. I mean, Black Panther's a different type of movie. It's much more real. It's not the same, the studio people were like, oh my God, we're risking all this stuff, when we're all like, make a movie that's really good, right? And we'll really love it.
And Gen Z is looking for content that has meaning. I mean, they say that, with their influencers, they say that with the brands that they follow, they want something that they can stand behind.
Yeah.
Abrams.
This looks like a random slide. This was based off topics that we were going to talk about. So the first two, those are two of our clients that were used in more of a traditional way. So Uber partnered with Spike Lee for one of their series, and our client Kalana, who is from Brooklyn, went around the city and took photos that were meaningful to her to kind of drive that conversation around what is in Brooklyn, and have that conversation around the series. And then one of our clients, Amy Pham, Ocean's 8, the all-female cast of Ocean's 8, they were all there, and it was about finding a strong, independent woman who was doing something in her life that she could relate to the movie and amplifying those messages. And so the other ones are brand conversations. But in terms of the network and studios, I think those two are the most meaningful.
Excellent. This is a pretty cool chart that just basically shows that despite what people are saying about Facebook, and certainly what we see in our tracking and reporting, Facebook certainly it's the internet for many people, and it's where people connect first before they go off to search for other things if they can't connect directly. Snapchat, we haven't really talked about Snapchat yet, and jury's out on where things are going with Snapchat.
I mean, I'll jump in here. From at least our world, despite the apparent demise of Facebook, it's still the second most popular platform to Instagram for branded content and influencer marketing. It's still used as a reach play. It's still a major player. It's bigger than YouTube. It's bigger than Twitter today. Now, Instagram's at 90% of campaigns involve Instagram. Other platforms, Facebook's I think about half that, 50 or 55% of campaigns. But to your point, it's still a major player. Snap's at 1% today, 1% of campaigns.
I mean, we know Google and Facebook have won. On that chart, a couple slides where we showed the lines crossing. What is interesting to think about is, it depends on who you talk to. They say 80% of the digital spend goes to Facebook and Google. So really, there's like 20% left, right? And you see that chart going up. That chart's going to continue to go up. Facebook and those guys are going to still dominate in that regard. But the rest of it is interesting to talk about. And that's something that I think a lot of us try to figure out. Some people felt maybe Snap could be one of those things, and some of us even hoped that there was going to be a third horse in the race a little bit. Doesn't seem probable now. Maybe they'll become part of Amazon or something. Who knows?
Just in terms of general advertising segmentation across different platforms, internet, television, magazines, radio, et cetera, this is the end of, after all of 2017, internet and social media, 88 billion, over television, 70 billion. So,
Do you mind if I jump back to Snapchat real quick?
sure.
Just because I've seen over the past maybe year, clients actually, wanting to move away from Snapchat, even those that had invested in it previously. And I think, in my opinion, from what I've seen from other studies, the users that are still on Snapchat are primarily using it as a one-to-one messaging platform. So they're not really using it to consume content, especially not from brands or other kinds of marketers. So while people are still using it, they're using it in a very different way from other platforms, like, for instance, Instagram, and like we talked about, stories, or IGTV. That's where people expect to find content from entertainment marketers.
This is the overall segmentation across all media, but just to break it down in terms of segmentation within digital and social, year to year, the growth from last year, 72 billion up to 88 billion, is pretty eye-catching. And this is just a quick note, as the measurement and speculation about the growth of box office specifically, not streaming, not ancillary, but just box office directly, up 4% from 38 billion in 2016 to 40 billion in 2017, and is currently ahead of 2017. So the expectation is that box office will again exceed.
What's viewership, though? Butts and seats.
Fewer.
Fewer.
Ticket prices go up, yes, without a doubt. Okay, so let's get to a little chatter about data. And data, is sort of a word that moves people in different directions. Data is gold, or data is a four-letter word, depending on how you look at it. But at the end of the day, the question is, can you make decisions based on data? Well, scientists all say yes. We're going to heat something up to this temperature before it explodes, and so we're going to monitor that. And the same applies to creative and marketing and content now in ways that never, ever existed before. There was never data, significant data around the campaign or programming beyond Nielsen ratings, which never really told the story. Certainly didn't tell the story about a brand. So now that we've got social media data across multiple platforms that can be sliced and diced in multiple ways, how are you all finding the data? How are you all using data? Is it telling you that, yes, this campaign's working, or fans are rejecting this concept, or this is through the roof and let's do more? How are you all using data to inform your client?
I'll go first. Data is the oil that drives the economy in digital advertising, digital marketing. Increasingly, all the decisions are being made informed in some capacity. There's a transition in terms of the capacity of CMOs to be able to understand how to interpret data to be meaningful to them in an education process, which is in transition right now. But very rarely, very, very rarely do we see somebody who's just like out there doing something because they feel it's the right thing to do. It's driven not only by the fact that we know more about our target audiences than we ever have before. From a marketer standpoint, this is a rich treasure trove of information that you've given to us, and it enables us to really highly segment you, slice and dice, correlate against other data sets, and really give you what you think you need or what we think you need. So it's a double-edged sword in that it can often be more than necessarily the end consumer may want or be able to handle. I don't want to go down a dark path, but I'm going to ask a question to the panel. And this is something I saw when I was in the UK last week. I'm sorry to stand here for a second. But there was a minister who was saying that Facebook should pay a mental health tax to the government in exchange for the downside of being how people feel. And I'm wondering if you guys have ever had any impression with your brands having sort of a discussion of the dark side of fear of missing out, or people themselves having mental health impact because of social.
There's a mental health influencer event tomorrow. And I think that from the influencer side, actually, it's something that's talked about a lot. And if you go on YouTube now, and a lot of the vloggers and people who are connecting with their audience, they're talking about the anxiety that they get, or the pressure that they feel, and how this all kind of drives their content decisions. And I mean, from the influencer side, it's a huge topic. And I think that if you go to real life with bullying and kids in high school and middle school, Instagram is your best life. You're only putting your best photo first. And so it's a delusional platform, and it can really affect, obviously, the younger generation. So I have to say a lot of our clients are really taking it upon themselves to really openly talk about it, because it is, I've never heard about kind of the tax on. I think that's great. I think it should happen. I agree.
I don't know if I would go that far. I mean, I think there's no doubt that there's a social impact to social media. Okay, so but that's not going to go away, and it's not going to. You can't necessarily blame the platforms for human behavior, which is the fear of missing out has been around before social media. So I think yes, the society in general needs to address it. As far as influencers, I think this is where the responsibility for brands comes in, because one of the things we really work hard on with our brands, one of our global brands is Dove. And Dove works very, very hard to make sure that they're not necessarily promoting products, but they're promoting the purpose of their brand. Almost all of the influencer marketing that we do is purpose-driven. It's the Dove Self-Esteem Project. It's No Digital Distortion, promoting the fact that our influencers do not use Photoshop on their photos. To try to change and shift. And that trickles down into the strategies we do for other brands of being authentic and being real and not creating a negative image. Because at the end of the day, and I think any brand marketer will agree, you can only get away with that false sort of negative type of advertising for so long, because consumers at the end of the day will end up rejecting it. And, leadership brands like Dove, who come out and try to create, social media advertising and marketing for good, will be the ones that win in the end. That's my personal belief. But I think people will reject brands that create that negative portrayal in society.
I just want to interject. If you guys want to start thinking about questions, we can start throwing some questions in here. So what are some of the tactics that you guys do deliver to your clients and your partners? Like, what's a good example? What have you seen when you look at a report or data or some insight, on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, where you go, oh my God, this is where your fans are connected, or we're wasting our money over here?
I would just say, from the talent perspective, my job is to sell. I sell my clients to brands every day. And I think the data has been so helpful when they're looking for a specific audience that maybe has a little bit more money. And so they're 25 to 34 and Creator IQ, shout out. They have, they can tell you about the income and like what people are making. And that kind of data, for me to be able to pull that information and go to a brand and say, this is your target audience. This is who you should be working with. Here's all of the reasons why. It makes my job so easy to sell.
Yeah, I think just to add on the data thing, I mean, if at this point in time, if you're hiring an influencer and you don't have data related to all of the demographics, income of their audience, then you're just, one of the things you said about was shocking. Clients coming to us and saying, I need this influencer. And we go, but wait a second, when we analyze the audience of that influencer, it's not your target. So why are you even doing that? And I think to answer your question about what we bring to the table, it really comes down to strategy, and it's data. Data at the core drives the strategy, because we have, I think a panelist says, we have more data than we've ever had before, especially on Instagram platform. I mean, the new API that rolled out with Facebook and Instagram, provides us more data than we've ever had before. And allows us to optimize. And so I think, we really try to create communities with the right audience, with the right, at the core, the data at the core. And then we use the data on the back end, and Google AI is our friend. We use lots and lots of Google TensorFlow to analyze all of the content that comes in, to use data to inform the influencer on how they can better perform on future pieces of content. So it always comes back to data at the end of the day.
Targeting. So Mark Zuckerberg sitting in front of Congress, walking them through the methodology of Facebook and how it actually works and how they actually make money. For us, we're like, right, that's why people use it, and that's why we work with it, and that's why brands use Facebook, because they can target. So obviously targeting using influencers is one part of it.
Here on this one, obviously the bigger takeaway, I think, from that day was the shame that we all feel that our senators and congressmen have no idea how the internet works. First of all, let's talk about that, which is like, oh my God. So it does shows that regulation is not going to work because they can't even figure out how it works. But that in itself is a side topic. Trends that we're seeing in brands, and it kind of goes differently from advertisers who are coming from television into sort of second screen experience. We've had this desire where they're like, well, let's get the actor to do the commercial, so it really seems like it's the same, which is sort of a beginning way to think about influence. You see this in sports where they'll pay the broadcaster to do the voiceover of the ad before the ad break, right? So they're blurring the lines intentionally, trying to get to this what we call native approach. It's more authentic. The second screen experience of activating something of value can't be an interruption-based thing. It can't just be like we're preventing you from getting what you need to do. It has to be something that gives you a value, a purpose, a cause, or something like that. So the new trend that we're seeing now is, I want my Kaepernick moment, says a brand CMO who doesn't stand for anything like Nike stands for, right? And then you say, well, okay, we got to actually stand for something. You can't just invent your Kaepernick, right? How do you feel about that? And that's where I think we're seeing meaning itself be divided in terms of doing the right thing.
And sort of staying on that, the idea in terms of data and targeting versus demographic profiling and buying ads on TV shows that are skewing older men versus younger women. the opportunity to actually macro and micro target is a completely new phenomenon.
Yeah.
I-
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't know. I'll speak personally. I was gonna ask the room. Wouldn't you rather have advertising that's more relevant and targeted to you than me receiving crap that I have no interest in? I don't know. Someone said this. I can't remember if it was this panel or earlier panel, but I actually engage with Instagram ads in feed because they're relevant to me, and I actually buy shit through Instagram, right? Like, it works, and I think most consumers are okay with that. I don't think, like our government, they really know how it works on the back end, but it's okay.
But, I mean, just to add on to that, I also teach at USC, a digital marketing course, and one of my students, when Cambridge Analytica broke, there was a huge debate, and everyone was so upset about the fact that there was data used to target messaging to people. And I went, so are you more upset that people were influenced by messages that actually resonated with them? Or are you more upset about the message itself? And all they did was employ the same tactics we're using right now to sell brands, of actually getting the right message to the right person in the right format at the right time. And so, it's kind of this double-edged sword. We love it because from a brand marketing perspective, I can find people that, to use Dove as the example, who really believe and support body positivity and are looking for ways to empower young girls. We can definitely get that out there in a positive message. But the double-edged sword is, there's really negative, hurtful, hateful messages that can go to people who actually want to see hurtful, hateful messages and then evangelize it. So, I think from a data perspective, that always ends up being the hot button conversation is, what do we regulate? How do you use it for good and not for evil?
Yeah, it works until you don't like it.
Exactly, that's a great point. Yeah, exactly.
I think it gives brands an opportunity to demonstrate that value. So we're taking the notion of what's ethical or what's right and bringing it to the point of the CMO to be able to make those decisions. And I think someone else on the panel touched on this earlier. The brands that make those wrong decisions are going to be pushed aside and not seen as relevant. Mm-hmm. The brands that make it transparent for people to understand how you're using your data and give you something that's more relevant to you, that's going to be the ones that work.
I would say, though, from a targeting standpoint, I mean, we think about what's available based on behaviours and attitudes, and yet even now, so many of us were just talking in terms of age, gender, and like traditional demo. So I think I'm always still surprised by how much we know you can reach the one person who cares specifically about that thing, but we'll still buy women 18 to 34 because that's how it's always been sold. So I think there's still a lot of shifting that needs to happen there too.
And I think just as far as my business goes, I think we're focused more on how to use that data creatively. Like, for example, we're really focused on, for instance, retargeting. So telling a story over a series of pieces of content so that if a user engages with the first piece of content, they'll see the next one and so and so. So I think, on the one hand, we do use insights and data to inform our creative strategy. It's also thinking about how to use that data available to create something that is more impactful over in a creative perspective as well.
On that point, what are some of the key metrics that you guys look at or that you feel are underserved, even if they do kind of speak to your day-to-day individually? You were lamenting the demos, you were lamenting the CPMs earlier. What are some of the ones that you feel are underserved or you're surprised that haven't caught more traction in the space over the last 6 months or a year?
I mean, what we tend to analyze is branded comments and branded conversations. So our AI is scanning through the conversations and the engagements related to, is the brand being mentioned is one thing, but to use Dove as an example again, are they talking about the theme that we're talking about? Or so Panera is a client of ours, are they talking about food things that we're trying to get them to talk about in conversation? So there's that piece of it. But at the end of the day, it's about action. And we're getting closer and closer to the ability to actually track into offline. So we do a lot of brand health tracking as well. So we run a campaign, we use a couple different partners, but it's the brand health tracking. Are people recalling what they saw and what is their sentiment from what they saw. And so we're going back into the fundamentals of advertising that we've been doing for years and years and years. It's just that rigor is now being applied into social media, influencer, and content marketing.
I would add, just to answer that question from a marketer standpoint, we hear a lot about multi-touch attribution. And what that means is not just taking the last click as the experience that drove the sale or the action. And increasingly, brands are being more sophisticated in knowing that the decision process, which changes across all lines of business and categories, is very dependent upon having many touch points. You do a search, you do something on Instagram, you do something on the brand site, you do something on TV. And it's not just what just happened, but it's all those things in totality. So how do you go about building a system that enables you to measure that and action that at scale?
Yeah, that.
But I also think that kind of ties into the talent side as well. The one-off brand deals are not working because you've stopped the conversation after the one opportunity.
Yep.
It's the longer-term partnerships. And in that slide, there was one of our clients who had been working with Maybelline for the last 2 years, and then finally she's had an in-store in Target with Maybelline. And so everyone was so excited for her because they know how long it's taken her to get to that point. And so that conversation was authentic and it was repetitive. And, it really led itself to a very successful campaign.
You look at emerging direct-to-consumer brands, and actually IAB has a great report. If you haven't seen the IAB report, it's amazing. But all the emerging direct-to-consumer brands that are coming up, the Caspers of the world, the Glossiers, all of these brands that are coming up are really focused on hyper-targeting that particular consumer. If they use influencer marketing, they're building long-term relationships. These people are co-creators of the brand. They're involved in the brand. We've got 3 direct-to-consumer brands we're developing right now. The influencers are brought in, our target market, the people we want to be involved with the brand, are being brought in before the product even launches. So they're actually coming in and helping to consult on a council. So we use them for product research, we use them for product development, we use them a lot longer in that value chain because it actually is much more authentic when it does launch. Glossier is a great example because they were content before they were ever a product. And so you look at these brands that were purpose built. And so right now it just tends to be a lot in the fashion and beauty area, but it's now spanning across every category. I mean, I could name tons of brands that are now coming up that same way with being very focused on data and bringing in an influencer council early and often.
Question up front.
Yes, I think it was Jason, you mentioned that CMOs need education to understand data, and I'm wondering, how are you educating them, and how come no one's talking about Pinterest?
Pinterest is great.
How
Pinterest is
can
great.
we educate CMOs?
We're
is the
investors
question.
in Pinterest.
These guys
We
are
love
in
it.
there.
Yeah.
I mean,
No.
I could talk a little bit about it. There's archetypes of CMOs, and there's many people that talk about this. This is not just us, but there's those that are the laggards, and often they're in traditional lines of business that are still supporting the old methodology. We're seeing the new types of CMOs that are digital first, that are, oh my God, millennial CMOs even, if you can say the horrible word. And this notion of direct to consumer who grew up in this always on economy that we live in now and are sort of digital first or digital native. The old guys are going to die off, just like it always is. It's true. We see it happening. They don't have the performance. They don't understand the transition. They still like what we call the helicopter shoot, which is like we got to do the shoot in Hawaii because they want to go to Hawaii, and that's just not how it is anymore. So it's rapidly changing. You're seeing the brands, either direct to consumer or the brands that are using the channels really effectively, move way ahead faster, and that we're on this slope that's only going to continue to accelerate.
Pinterest is a strategy you use when you're looking for people who are planning and looking for discovery on certain categories. Instagram just happens to be more broad, but Pinterest works very well if you're in the right product category and have the proper need.
Yeah, just a couple on that. I super value Pinterest, but I don't see it as a social network because people are not social on Pinterest. It's a search platform, and people search and save, and I think it has a very unique purpose in people's sort of platform strategy. So we have definitely tapped into Pinterest for several different marketing campaigns, especially ones that have to do more with home or lifestyle, but I don't really see it falling in this sort of social network space.
Yeah, they have some great native ad products on the platform, and we've seen some really good growth in Pinterest over the last couple of years as far as, again, right category, right creators, right partners to work with, as something that's actually replaced Snap as that, call it, 5th platform behind the big 4.
Last question.
Why isn't anyone talking about Line?
It's just not
Line?
mainstream.
It's,
It's just not mainstream.
The new Vine?
in North America.
Line. It's
Yeah,
I mean it's mainly
it's
peer to
huge in
peer. I mean it's
Japan.
actually Snap's going peer to peer. It's like a more of a WhatsApp
messaging.
than
Yeah, or
social.
WeChat. Yeah, I mean,
there
it's
is a
huge in
social element to
Japan,
it, but
yeah.
It's got a lot of content. I mean, you even see,
Yeah.
you know, American brands, Online USA from Toyota to Bloomberg's got it. I mean.
yeah.
it's a
I mean,
broad-
Twitch is another one that we haven't talked about, and
Yeah.
Twitch is massive. So, I mean, it depends on
TikTok?
what category you're in.
Anybody?
Yeah. There are a lot of them out there. I mean, there's lots of different, I think, once again, it comes down to what the strategy is at the beginning, who you're trying to reach, what's the message, what's the product, and which platform is right. And the mass, if you're going mass, just happens to be YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Does not mean that we don't use, we use Kick Messenger for chatbots. So you probably, most of you guys have never been on Kick, but I promise you 13 to 17-year-old kids are. So yeah, there's different platforms for different strategies.
I think
Ladies
also,
and gentlemen, we are getting the hook. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you to our amazing panel.